All right, hey, just as a reminder before we get started today, we are beginning a brand new series next week, next Sunday, called I Have a Question. We're looking at times in the New Testament when Jesus is either asked a question or he asks a question. And it's through these questions that we kind of see these unpacking of truths, and a lot of the questions that are asked and answered are questions we are still asking and trying to answer today. So I want to encourage you to come back next week and bring somebody who you think could benefit from this, and we'll dive into that next week. But today we are talking 1-8 weekend. You might have noticed it, but of course the weather is beginning slightly to change. This is an exciting time for me. I don't know about for you. It's an exciting time for me because this is the one time of year that sometimes you kind of fall into some unexpected money. And you know how this happens. You pull your jacket out that's been in the closet all year long, right? You put that jacket on, you slip your hands in the pocket, and your fingertips, they touch that very familiar papery, linen-y feel. Yeah, you know what you got there? That's cash. That's cold, hard cash. Now the question is, how much cash do you have, right? And your kind of heart starts racing a little bit. You get flushed with all the dopamine, right? You get excited, pull it all out, and maybe you got a 1. There's nothing to sneeze about a 1, right? You should be proud. You got a 1, maybe a 5, maybe a 10, maybe a 20, and your day is made, right? I love that. So it's one thing to find something you didn't know was lost, right? That you didn't realize that you had left it there. It's been there all summer long, and you didn't know it was there to be found later. It's something completely different. To find something that you lost, something that you loved, something that you cherished, and when you find it, when you're reunited with that thing that you loved, you cherished, that thing you truly value, when you're reunited with that thing again, that's a whole nother thing. Something that's so beautiful and exciting. In the book of Luke, now Luke, if you're not familiar, think of it as a biography. It's the biography of the life, the teachings, the ministry, and the message of Jesus. And it's one of 4 biographies that we have. And so Luke, he records this moment where Jesus tells 3 stories. And what's interesting about it is he tells these stories back to back to back. There's no break. One story flows directly into the next story. And Jesus uses this as a way to communicate the significance of the message he's trying to convey at this moment. It's like he's saying, okay, I'm going to tell you a story. Here's the story. Now, just in case you missed what I was trying to get across to you, I'm going to tell it again. I'm going to change it up a little bit, but I'm going to tell essentially the same story again. And the third time he comes around and says, just in case you're not following me, just so we're absolutely clear, I'm going to tell the same story a third time, but I'm going to come at it from yet another angle, just so you understand what I am trying to say. So what that means to us is that as he structures these stories 3 in a row, it is clear he is trying to drive home a point. He's trying to make sure we are aware of something. He's using 3 different stories to communicate one truth. And what is that one truth? That truth is that God really, really, really enjoys finding lost things. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 4, let's take a look. Jesus says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep. Let's stop just for a moment. When he says suppose, he is igniting their imaginations, right? He is calling them to imagine this scene with them. I want you to do the same. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. And he says, I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Verse 8, or suppose, next story, a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Then we get to the third story. Now, the third story is the longest one, so I'm going to do a little bit of summarizing here, just for time's sake. But it says, Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. So the younger son comes to the father, and essentially what's embedded in his request is the fact that I don't want to live in your house anymore. I don't want to live under your rules. I don't want to be here. I want you to give what I think is coming to me, and just let me go, right? It's the ultimate act of disrespect and rebellion. And so the father does. He divides his property between the two sons, and he gives the younger son half of the estate. And what happens is, as you can imagine, if you're not familiar with the story, this young, immature guy with all this money in his pocket, he goes to a distant land, it says, and he squanders his money, he squanders his life. He wakes up. Now think about it, this is a Jewish audience. He wakes up next to a pig trough, right? And the Jews are like, ooh, next to a pig trough. And he actually envies the pigs for what they get to eat, because he's lost all of his friends, he's lost all of his money, he's going hungry, and he thinks to himself, you know what, my father's slaves have it better than I do. I'm gonna go home, and I'm not gonna be a son again, but I can at least go home and be a slave. And so I'll go home and be a slave to my father, and at least I'll have 3 squares a day and a roof over my head. And it says he came to his senses, and he got up and he went to his father, verse 20. But then you have this moment, this beautiful moment. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him. Filled with compassion, he ran to him, ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And here's what's beautiful about this moment. He doesn't wait for the son to offer an adequate apology. He does not require the son to demonstrate just how sorry he is. He doesn't put the son on probation to prove over time that he has genuinely changed. The father instantly, immediately reinstates the son back to his place as a son, and then he throws a party. He publicly celebrates this child who's come home. Bring the fattened calf, kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now, if you look at those 3 stories, you begin to see some patterns. And some of those patterns are very clear, and some of them are a little bit more implied, but we're going to unpack that today. But what we see is this. We see that when there is something is lost, right? When something is lost, it triggers a disproportionate effort in the lives of those who want to find it. And then once it is found, there is a disproportionate response to it. So let me say it another way. When you compare the thing that was lost to the effort and the energy that is expended by the person who tries to find it, and then when you compare that thing to how that person reacts when that thing is found, the effort seems excessive and the end response looks extravagant. Now, Jesus is talking to people, and he has painting pictures that are pretty common to his world. And so you have a sheep. This is one sheep of 100. And you have one lost coin out of 10. And one son of 2. Now, I don't want to be harsh or cold here, but in each of these cases, something was lost. But in reality, no one in the story lost everything. Yet, in each of the stories, the response of the shepherd and of the woman and of the father, they appear to be over the top. They appear to be disproportionate. Why? Because when something is lost that you love, right? When you lose something that you love, there is no comfort. You find no consolation in the thing you still have. Let me tell you a story about a woman, Tiffany Otterbeck. Tiffany Otterbeck, she was like so many women. She was cooking dinner for her family, and she pulled off her wedding ring. And she wrapped it in a towel. And she put the towel on the counter. Then after dinner, she cleaned the kitchen and accidentally picked up that towel and threw it in the trash. It wasn't until the next day she realized what had happened. The wedding ring was gone. But even by then, the trash had been taken out, put on the curb, and picked up by the trash truck. She calls the sanitation department of her city. She gets a sympathetic ear of a sanitation worker who radios the trash truck, tells them not to pick up any more trash that day, pulls the trash truck over at a safe location, and parks it there until that evening when Tiffany Arterbeck shows up. They essentially dump the truck, the contents of the truck, out onto the pavement. And Tiffany, she spends the next several hours rummaging through 7 tons of trash in order to find her wedding ring. Let me tell you what Tiffany Arterbeck didn't do. When she realized she lost her ring, she did not run to her bedroom, take all of her jewelry out of all the drawers, dump it onto her bed and go, at least I still have this. She found no comfort in what she still had. There was no consolation in the jewelry that she still possessed. She was driven to find the thing that she cherished, that she loved the most. See, the shepherd leaves the 99 other sheep, right? Who, by the way, those 99 other sheep, they didn't wander away. Those 99 other sheep, they didn't stray, but he leaves 99 of them to go look for the one who did. The woman loses a coin, which was the equivalent, really, of a day's wages. Now, nobody ever wants to lose a day's wages, but she still had 9 others, which means she wasn't going to go hungry. She didn't have to file for bankruptcy. Yet she lights a lamp. She lights a lamp in order to look for the glint of metal somewhere in her home. She sweeps the floor in order to send that coin kind of sailing through the room and listening for the little chink of metal that'll tell her where it is. She goes on a search. She turns, the picture is that she's turning her house upside down, all for 1 coin. Now, you might be thinking that compared to the shepherd and to the woman and the effort that they put forth, you might look at the father and his response to the son. Now, listen, it might seem a little underwhelming, but that's where we're wrong. And I want you to understand that the father's response is just as disproportionate as the shepherd and the woman. Like, he's not out there hanging up posters. He's not calling hospitals. There isn't any indication that he begins an active search for his son. He stays home and he waits. And if you didn't know any better, he might look indifferent, especially when you look at what he doesn't do compared to what the shepherd and the woman actually do. But let's understand the situation. The difference between the father and the shepherd and the woman is that unlike the sheep and the coin, the son was not lost physically. He was lost relationally. See, all indication is that this son, he wasn't lost when he left home. He was lost before he left home. If you have a son that goes to his father and he says essentially, give me my inheritance, which really means, if you get right down to brass tacks, it means, I wish you were dead. But I don't want to wait for you to die. I just want what's coming to me now. If you get somebody that has that level of disrespect, that degree of disrespect in that culture, let me tell you what typically would happen. If a son went to the father and basically said, I wish you were dead, give me my inheritance, in that culture, what would typically happen is the father would cast the son out, would disown the son, and cut him off from all of the family resources. He would be thrown out with nothing. But what does this father do? This father liquidates half of his estate and he gives it to his son. His response in reality is just as disproportionate as the other two. It's different, but it is just as disproportionate. Why? Because this is a father who is so committed to reconnecting with his son relationally that he hands over half of all that he has ever worked for. And let me tell you, I guarantee that father knows he's never going to see a dime of that money back ever again. But he hands the money over to his son, hoping that one day he will see his son again. Listen, when you have a son, the approach has to be different than with a sheep or with a coin. And this father was trying to win back his son. And so had he responded any other way, there would have been no way back. There would have been no possibility of reconciliation. So in each one of these stories, someone loses something and it triggers them. It triggers the shepherd, it triggers the woman, and it triggers the father to, in their own way, to begin looking, searching, expending great amounts of resources and energy to try to find that one lost thing. Now, some people in this audience are, might be looking at it and thinking, well, really, sheep wander away all the time. Coins are lost and found every day. And a rebellious son, well, that's pretty routine. But it's what happens next in which the stories get really, really good. Because in every story, they end with an extravagant, over-the-top celebration. When I was a kid, I played soccer. Like a lot of us in this room have played soccer. I was probably kindergarten. And it was a time in which soccer in kindergarten, if you've ever watched something, soccer in kindergarten, it's not the beautiful game. It is played by professionals. It's just a pack of kids that surround a ball, and they kick it till it kind of spurts out the side, and the pack moves to the next and surrounds it again. And there's no scoring, really. It's a very ugly thing to watch. But yet still, parents find a way to get really super actively involved in that. And so I, like every kid, I wanted to score a goal. They were so rare, right? So rare. I wanted to be one that would score a goal. And I was, you can imagine, I know it's surprising to you, but not really super athletic. And so my chances of scoring a goal, which were already out of reach, was slim to none, right? But then one day it happened. I don't know. I can't tell you how. It was not due to my ability or my strategy. I just found myself separated from the pack for some reason, probably an airplane, and now I'm standing in front of the goal, just kind of standing there, doing what kindergartners do on the soccer field, not really paying attention, and the ball rolls right in front of me, like a miracle. And I look up and I see basically a terrified goalie right in front of me, and this is my chance, right? This is my chance for athletic immortality. And I rear back and I kick the ball, it sails into the back of the net. I scored a goal. And I lose my ever-loving mind. I throw my hands up, I close my eyes, I start screaming, I shout, I'm celebrating. I celebrate like I just won a gold medal. I am celebrating over the top, and I just lose myself in this moment. And I just keep jumping up and down and yelling until I hear the words, "Hey, kid." And I open my eyes. And there's the goalie, and he's looking at me like I'm crazy, like, "What are you doing?" And I start to look around, trying to assess my situation, and I realize, what am I doing? I don't know how long I stood there and jumped up and down. I don't know how long I stood there and celebrated in my moment of glory, but it was long enough for them to pull the ball out of the back of the net and start the game over. And they were playing down the field, and I was still there, jumping up and down, celebrating. And everybody's probably looking on the sideline like, "Oh, he's having a fit," or something, right? That is a child that needs some medication of some sort, right? See, that's what I did. I lost myself in the moment, and nobody else celebrated like I did. That was the most disappointing part. I thought everybody was celebrating with me. No, I was the only one that was celebrating. And that's what I'm talking about. That's the picture of this over-the-top celebration that kind of nobody else really expects, right? Everybody else sees it happening, but nobody really understands it. Let me go back through this. Look at this. It says the shepherd calls his friends together and his neighbors, and he says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." Let's have a party. When the woman finds the coin, she calls her friends and neighbors and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." The father says, "Bring the fattened calf, let's kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate." They throw a party, and I'm thinking like a big party, like an over-the-top party, like a throw your hands up in the air and get lost in the moment kind of party. And his audience, Jesus is telling these stories, and his audience, I guarantee you, they're looking at him going, "Party? Man, it's just a sheep. A party, man, it's just one coin. Party, it's just another teenager gone off the rails." And they're thinking to themselves, if you're going to throw a party every time you find a lost sheep, or you pick up a lost coin, or you have a fight with your kid, you're going to have a lot of parties. And I think Jesus would say, yeah, Wouldn't that be amazing? See, when something you love is lost, when something you cherish goes missing, the lost thing becomes the focus of all of your attention. And when it is found, it is cause for an over-the-top celebration. Something we need to keep in mind is why Jesus is telling these stories. What happened? There's an inciting incident that we need to look to figure out why he's actually telling these stories. Let me back up just a little bit to give you some context here. So he's telling these stories because it says in verse 1, now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. But when the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Here's what's interesting about Jesus. You could say that Jesus was the most religious person that ever walked the face of the earth. But here's what's funny about Jesus. He was never drawn to, never gravitated towards religious people. He was a perfect model of godliness, but he didn't go after the people who were thought to be godly. Absolutely sinless and holy, but he didn't hang out with those who had a high value for holiness. And you know what's funny about it? He caught all kinds of grief for it. You know why? Because these people, these Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they knew he was from God. They even admitted it. There was a conversation Jesus had with a guy named Nicodemus, and he says, listen, we know you're from God. Nobody who does these things could not be from God. And so they know he's from God, but they couldn't understand why someone so religious, so holy, and so godly would spend all of his time, would share meals with people who were so irreligious, so unholy, and so ungodly. And they were jealous. They couldn't understand why. Their devotion did not earn them his attention. But instead of taking stock of themselves and really looking into what Jesus was doing, they assumed that the problem was his, that his unwillingness to associate with them and his willingness to associate with these people, that was a flaw in his character. And so what they did is they mumbled and they muttered and they grumbled and they groused. And he heard their grumbling and their muttering. And he took this opportunity to attempt to revamp their understanding of the heart of God and to reverse their assumptions about what God values most. And Jesus uses these stories, the lost sheep and the lost coin and the lost son, to highlight the simple fact that lost people matter to God. You know, that might sound familiar to you because that's one of our values here at Hulen Street Church. In fact, I would say this. We have 5 values. That's the ultimate value. It's the value from which all other values flow. And it's why we do what we do. Lost people matter. That's why we invite them, the people in our circles, to find their place in our family and their part in God's story. Lost people matter. It's why we pray for our friends and our family members and our neighbors and our coworkers. Lost people matter. It's why we send money and we have partnerships with other churches around the world and the United States. Lost people matter. It's why some of us are willing to leave our family and all that's familiar to live in another country, to embed ourselves in another culture. Because lost people matter. It's why we share when we can, and it's why we go when we are called. Lost people matter to us because lost people matter to God. Now listen, when we were crafting those value statements, we actually had an argument. Do we actually use the word lost? Because lost can almost be like a pejorative to some people. They can take offense to that. You can take exception to that. Some of you right now, you're here and you could say, like, I'm not a Christian. You would say that, you would admit that, and I'm glad you're here. But even if I called you lost, I put you in the category of a lost person, you would take offense at that. You would take exception to that. Because that's something that's kind of a dismissive thing. It's a lost person is someone who's confused, or someone who's absent-minded, or someone who's overwhelmed by a situation. And you think to yourself, I am not lost. Why would you call me lost? But here's what I want. I want to kind of reshape how your understanding of that through the lens of these stories. If that's you, if that's your story today, through the lens of these stories, I want you to understand that when God calls someone lost, it is a statement of just how valuable they are to him. It's a declaration of your immense worth to him. Let me tell you another thing. If you're here today and you fall into that category of unchristian, non-Christian, lost, let me tell you, I really believe this. God's more excited about you being here than he is about me being here. I believe that. God is more excited about you being in this church than he is about me being in this church. Why? Well, because technically I'm a found thing. I'm a found thing. Now, I can't lay any claim or take any credit for my foundness, but I'm a found thing. And as a found thing, I'm kind of where I'm supposed to be. Do you get excited over finding your keys where they're supposed to be? Do you get excited when you find your wallet where it is supposed to be? No. But when you find it where it's not supposed to be, like when you find it and you've been looking for it, that's when you get excited. And I want you to understand that if you fall into that category, it means you are valuable to him. And it's your declaration of immense worth to him. I know sometimes it's hard to come into a church, but man, I hope you see this in the lives of the people here. But if you're a guest with us today, if you're in that category of unbelief today, you came in, it was hard for you to come in here maybe. You didn't know what you're going to find. You didn't know how you're going to be received or if you're going to be accepted or not. Let me tell you something. What would have happened if Jesus were here? He would have come right to you. You feel like an outsider. You feel like you don't belong. You feel like you don't deserve, whatever. Jesus would have come right to you because you matter to him. Think of it this way. There is no better indication of something or someone's value than how far you are willing to go in order to find it, or how much you're willing to sacrifice when you do retrieve it. Tiffany Otterbeck was willing to wade through, sift through 7 tons of trash because of the value that ring held to her. She left that night, not just with the ring, but with some intimate and disturbing knowledge into the life of her neighbors because of the things she waded through. But she did it for the ring because the ring was that precious to her. The ring was that valuable to her. How precious are you to God? How valuable are you to God? Let me give you some verses that might help you understand just how much God values you. You here now, not value you as a possible believer, not how he might value you as a church member, but how he values you at this very moment where you are right now. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God showed how much he loved us by sending his one and only Son into the world so that we might have eternal life through him. There's a direct correlation between the thing's value and to what someone is willing to do, what someone is willing to give, how much someone is willing to sacrifice in order to retrieve that thing. That's how valuable you are to him because of what he was willing to give for you. My favorite picture of this, and I use it all the time, my favorite picture of this is the metaphor of C.S. Lewis where he compares what Jesus did for us to that of a pearl diver. Let me read this to you. Lewis writes, "One may think of a diver first reducing himself to nakedness, then glancing in midair, then gone with a splash, vanishing, rushing down through the green and the warm water into the black and cold water, down through the increasing pressure into the death-like region of ooze and slime and old decay. and then up again, back to the color and the light, his lungs almost bursting, till suddenly he breaks the surface again, and holding in his hand the dripping, precious thing, he went down to recover. Listen, you are the dripping and precious thing that he dove down into the death-like region of ooze and slime and old decay to retrieve. You are that thing. He cherishes you. He values you. And when he finds you, heaven celebrates in a party beyond imagination because of you. We're going to end our service today a little differently. I've asked Aaron and the band to sing a song over you, and I want you just to sit here. We don't do this often, but I just want to encourage you to sit here in a moment and reflect on what we've talked about today. Reflect on what you've heard today. And allow the words of the song, allow the lyrics of this song just to penetrate your heart. Just to listen to what God may want to say to you through this message and through these lyrics. Take a listen. I love that declaration in the song, that one moment, all comes together. He says, I'm in, I'm yours. When that reality sets of just what God has done on our behalf, what he did for us, how he pursued us, valued us, loved us, cherished us, went after us, found us, saved us. I'm in, I'm yours. Now,